The woman at the back door looked once at Maribel's face, then at the clean apron folded over her arm, and changed her mind. "We've decided not to take anyone on after all," she said. Behind her, 12 ranch hands were waiting for breakfast. Mara had heard versions of that sentence since she was 15. Sometimes people were kinder about it. Sometimes they stared at the wine-colored birthmark that covered the left side of her face from temple to jaw and forgot to hide what they were thinking. This woman tried to hide it. She failed. Mara lowered her eyes to the open flour barrel beside the kitchen wall. "You're short," she said. The woman frowned. "Excuse me?" "You're feeding 12 men twice a day. That barrel won't carry you through Thursday. I think I know my own kitchen." Mara nodded toward the measuring scoop. "You're using almost 8 pounds a day. There's less than 24 left." The woman looked toward the barrel. A man standing near the delivery wagon had heard everything. He was tall, brown-haired, and broad through the shoulders, with his sleeves rolled to the elbows and flour dust on one forearm. He looked into the barrel. Then he looked at Mara. "How long did that take you?" Mara turned toward him. "How long did what take?" "Figuring the flour. I saw the scoop." The woman at the door stiffened. "Mr. Mercer, if you're finished with the delivery..." "I am." He lifted the empty sack from the wagon bed and tossed it inside. Then he looked at Mara again. "You looking for work?" The woman at the door made a small sound. Mara heard it. So did he. Mara picked up her canvas bag. I run Mercer Station 12 miles south. I know where it is." "You cook?" "Yes." "Keep accounts?" "Yes." "Handle freight crews?" "I can handle men who know how to pay for what they order." One corner of his mouth moved. "I'm Jonah Mercer." Maribel. His eyes went to the birthmark only once. Not long enough to make a show of ignoring it. That mattered. "My mealroom is losing money," he said. "My cook quit 3 weeks ago. I've been doing both jobs badly." Mara waited. He continued. "I can offer 2 weeks paid. If it works, we talk again." "What kind of work?" "Cooking, ordering, counter." She studied him. "Counter?" "Yes." "You mean where customers can see me?" Now his face changed, but not in the way she expected. He looked annoyed. Not at her. At whoever made you ask that. Where else would the counter be? Mara looked back toward the house. The woman had stepped inside. The door remained open, but only by an inch. "I've had offers before," Mara said. "Kitchen work, laundry, cleaning, provided I stayed behind the wall." Jonah rested one hand on the wagon rail. "I don't have enough walls to run a business that way." "That isn't an answer." He thought for a moment. Then he said, "If you manage the meals, you manage the counter." Mara shifted the bag in her hand. 2 weeks. 2 weeks. Paid every Saturday. Yes. And if somebody objects to me serving them, they can decide whether they're hungry. Mara looked at him for another second. Then she climbed onto the wagon. Mercer Station sat where 2 freight roads crossed a low stretch of Montana territory. It was not much to look at. A long timber building faced the road. Behind it stood a repair shed, a stable, and a wagon yard rutted deep by iron wheels. 3 empty coffee cups sat on the counter when Mara walked inside. One had a fly floating in it. She set down her bag. "Where are your ledgers?" Jonah pointed toward a shelf. "Where are your food stores?" "Back room." "Your prices?" "On the board." Mara looked at the board. Coffee, 5 cents. Bread and beans, 10. Beef plate, 15. Pie, 10. She turned. "You charge the same for beans as bread and beans." "Usually." "Why?" "People don't argue." "Neither do your debts?" Jonah leaned against the counter. "You always start a job by insulting the owner?" "Only when the owner is paying me to find the problem." That earned the smallest laugh. Mara opened the ledger. By sundown, she knew why Mercer Station was failing. Jonah bought too much beef, too little flour, let teamsters run tabs, and never wrote down how many meals went unpaid during crowded arrivals. Worse, when 3 wagons appeared at once, orders vanished into noise. Mara found a scrapboard near the repair shed and 12 colored wooden pegs in a drawer used for harness repairs. Jonah watched her drill small holes into the board. "What's that?" "Your memory." "My memory is fine. Your accounts say otherwise." She divided the board into columns. Coffee, bread, beans, beef, pie. When a man pays, his order gets a peg. Red for meals, blue for drink, white for extras. You expect Teamsters to wait while you play checkers? I expect them to eat what they paid for. The first test came the following afternoon. 4 freight wagons rolled in together, carrying 14 men hungry enough to complain before they reached the door. Mara stood at the counter. Conversation slowed. One man stared openly at her face. Another looked away too quickly. A third turned around and walked back outside. Mara did not call after him. "What'll it be?" she asked the next man. "Beef." "Bread?" "Yes." "Coffee?" 2. She moved 3 pegs. Within 20 minutes, every paid plate was on the correct table. No order had been lost. No man had eaten on credit. Jonah stood near the kitchen door with his arms folded. When the room emptied, Mara counted the coins twice. 32% more than yesterday, she said. Jonah looked at the pegboard. Could be luck. "Then we'll see tomorrow." He nodded. For the first time since she arrived, Mara let herself smile. It did not last long. Near sunset, hoofbeats sounded outside. A black horse stopped beside the hitching rail. The rider wore a dark coat too fine for dust and gloves. He did not remove when he stepped inside. His eyes moved from Jonah to Mara, then to the pegboard. "Mercer," he said. Jonah's shoulders tightened. "Silas." The man looked around the room. "You've made changes." Jonah said nothing. Silas Vane placed one gloved hand on the counter. "Maybe that means you're finally ready to hear my offer." Mara looked at Jonah. Jonah looked back at Silas. "What offer?" Silas smiled. "The one I've been making for 6 months." He tapped the counter once. "Continental Freight wants this station." Silas Vane did not sit down. He kept one gloved hand on the counter and looked around Mercer Station as if he already owned the boards beneath his boots. Jonah stayed behind the counter. "You have your answer." Silas smiled. "Answers change when accounts get worse." Mara stood beside the pegboard. She did not move. Silas looked at her again. "And this is new," Jonah said. "Mara Bell manages the mealroom." "Does she?" "She does." Silas turned toward Mara. "I hope Mercer warned you this place is bleeding money." Mara said. "He didn't need to." Jonah glanced at her. Silas gave a quiet laugh. "Then you understand my interest." "I understand you want the building, and the crossing, and the traffic." His smile faded a little. "You catch on quickly." Mara straightened one red peg that sat crooked on the board. "What would happen to the station?" Silas answered easily. "Continental would improve it. Larger kitchen, more stable space, company prices, regular supply contracts. And Jonah? We would find a position for him." Jonah's face hardened. Mara looked toward him. Silas had chosen that sentence on purpose. Jonah said, "We're done." Silas lifted both hands slightly. "No need to take offense. I'm not offended. You should think about winter." "I think about winter every year. This one might cost you more than the others." Jonah came around the counter. Silas held his ground for another second, then stepped away. At the door he looked back at Mara. 2 weeks, was it? Mara said nothing. Silas smiled again. Then he left. The next morning, Mara changed the menu board. Jonah noticed before he noticed breakfast. "You raised the beef plate. 2 cents. Men will complain. Then they can order beans. You cut the pie. Half yesterday's slices were thrown out. They like knowing it's there. They like eating it more." Jonah rubbed a hand over his face. You've been here 3 days, and the meal room has lost money for 3 years." He stared at her. Mara waited. Then Jonah reached for the chalk. For 1 second she thought he was going to erase her prices. Instead, he drew a line under them. 3 days, he said. If revenue drops, we change it back. Fair. By noon, 2 wagon teams arrived. The first complained about beef. The second ordered beans and bread. Nobody left hungry. Nobody left owing money. Mara began writing each day's sales in a separate column. At night, she counted unused portions. She weighed flour. She marked coffee by the pound. She moved old stock to the front and fresh stock behind it. Jonah watched all of it. On the 5th day, he stopped checking behind her. On the 6th, a freighter named Harlan Pike pushed a coin across the counter and said, "Mercer usually lets me settle Friday." Mara pushed the coin back. "Then Friday will be a fine day to eat." Harlan stared at her. Jonah was 10 feet away. Mara could feel him listening. Harlan looked past her. "Jonah?" Jonah picked up a crate. "Counter's hers." Harlan looked back at Mara. She held his gaze. After a moment, he pulled out another coin. "Beans. Bread? Yes. Coffee? Black." Mara moved the pegs. Jonah carried the crate into the storeroom. He did not say anything when he came back. He did not need to. By the end of the first week, Mara's trial had become something neither of them mentioned. The station was busier. Not crowded every day, but steady. Men who had once passed Mercer Station for the larger Continental depot began stopping because they could eat, refill water, and leave without waiting an hour. Some stared at Mara. A few made excuses and left. More stayed. Work changed the way Jonah spoke to her. At first he said, "Can you handle that?" Then he said, "What do you think?" By the second Saturday, he handed her the mealroom cash box before riding into Fort Benton. "Supplier invoices are under the ledger." Mara took the box. "You trust me with all of it?" Jonah put on his hat. "I trust you more than I trust my own numbers. That isn't difficult." He looked at her. She almost smiled. He did first. The moment passed quickly. Jonah went outside. Mara watched through the window as he checked the wagon yard gate twice before climbing onto his horse. She had noticed that habit. He did it whenever money was tight. That evening, he returned with flour, coffee, salt, and a folded invoice tucked beneath his coat. He set the paper on the counter. Mara looked at the total. "They raised us. 8%. Why?" "Freight adjustment." "Since when?" "Since this morning." Mara looked again. "That isn't enough to break us." "No." Jonah pulled off his hat. "But it's a start." 3 days later, the flour delivery did not come. Jonah rode halfway to town before meeting the supplier's wagon on the road. He returned alone. Mara was stacking clean plates when he came inside. She looked at his face. "What happened?" "Credits canceled." She stopped. "For how long?" "Permanent unless we pay cash on delivery." "Why?" Jonah dropped his gloves onto the counter. Continental moved most of their freight contract to the same supplier last month. Mara understood. Silas did not need to threaten anyone. He only needed to make Mercer Station expensive to serve. She walked to the storeroom. 1 flour sack, less than half a tin of coffee, beans for perhaps 2 days. Jonah followed. "We close the mealroom." "No." "Mara, if we close, the teams learn to stop somewhere else. We can't cook with empty bins." She crouched beside the lowest shelf. Potatoes, onions, 2 baskets of eggs, salt pork, dried beans. She looked through the rear window. Across the road, a farm wagon passed heading north. Another followed behind it. Mara stood. Jonah said, "What?" She walked back into the mealroom. For a long moment, she studied the menu board. Then she erased beef, then pie, then coffee. Jonah stared at the empty spaces. You just removed half the reason men stop here. No. She put the chalk down. I removed half the things we can't afford. He crossed his arms. What exactly are you planning? Mara looked toward the nearly bare shelves. We open tomorrow. With what? With whatever grows closer than Fort Benton. Jonah frowned. Mara picked up a white peg and rolled it between her fingers. We stopped trying to cook like Continental. She placed the peg into the first column. And make them try to cook like us. Before sunrise, Mara Bell was already standing beside the road with a pencil tucked behind one ear, and Jonah Mercer watching her from the station doorway. The first farm wagon appeared through the gray morning light. Mara raised one hand. The driver slowed. By 7 o'clock, she had bought 6 dozen eggs, 2 sacks of potatoes, onions, beans, 3 sides of smoked pork, and enough fresh milk to last the day. All of it came from farms within 10 miles. All of it was paid in cash. Jonah looked at the nearly empty money box. That's most of what we had. I know. If today goes badly, we don't get another try tomorrow. I know that too. He studied her face. Mara was lining coins into 3 straight rows on the counter. You always do that when you're worried? She stopped. Do what? Arrange things. Mara looked down at the coins. Then she pushed them into the drawer. You always check the gate twice when you're worried. Jonah stared at her. Fair enough. They opened at 8. The new menu was short. Eggs and potatoes. Beans with pork. Fresh bread when flour allowed. Milk. Hot water with dried mint from a nearby farm in place of coffee. The first teamster through the door frowned at the board. No beef? Not today. No coffee? Not today. What kind of freight station doesn't have coffee? The kind with hot food ready in 6 minutes. He looked toward Jonah. Jonah pointed at Mara. Counters hers. The teamster sighed. Beans. By noon, he had come back for another plate. The next wagon brought 5 men, then 7. Mara discovered something before Jonah did. The simpler meals moved faster. There were fewer choices to confuse the kitchen. Less food spoiled. Fewer pans stayed half full at closing. The potatoes cost a fraction of the beef. The beans could feed twice as many men from the same storage space. By the 3rd day, Jonah placed the account book beside Mara's elbow. You were right. She did not look up. About which thing? That is becoming an expensive question. She smiled. Jonah opened the ledger. Their mealroom costs had fallen enough that even with smaller purchases made in cash, they were keeping more from every plate. Mara ran her finger down the figures. We still need coffee. I know. And flour. I know. We can buy flour from the mill east of town if we collect it ourselves. That's 14 miles each way. We own a wagon. Jonah looked at her. You planning to work the counter and drive supply runs? No. She closed the ledger. You are. The next morning, Jonah drove east. He returned after dark with flour stacked beneath canvas and 2 small sacks of coffee, bought directly from a trader who had no contract with Continental Freight. Mara came outside when she heard the wagon. Jonah climbed down stiffly. You look terrible. I missed you too. She took one end of a flour sack. He took the other. They carried it inside together. That became their pattern. Mara handled the station. Jonah hunted supplies. When nearby farms learned Mercer Station paid cash and did not delay settlement, more wagons began stopping on their own. Eggs arrived every Tuesday. Potatoes on Thursday. A ranch wife north of the crossing began bringing butter. A farmer named Cobb offered onions at a lower price if Mara would take 2 crates at once. She agreed. No single person saved them. Enough people simply found that doing business with Mercer Station made sense. By late September, the colored pegboard was filling faster than before the supply cutoff. Jonah began arriving at the counter each Sunday night with the weekly accounts. At first, Mara noticed only that he had changed the columns. Then she saw the headings. Station. Repairs. Reserve. Mara. She looked up. What is that? Your share. I get wages. You also built half the system keeping this place open. I didn't buy the building. You're improving the business inside it. That doesn't make me an owner. No. Jonah closed the ledger. Not yet. Mara stared at him. For once, she had no quick answer. Jonah picked up the empty water pitcher. I'll fill this. He walked away before she could see whether he regretted saying it. 3 weeks later, Silas Vane made his next move. A printed notice appeared at the Continental Depot. For cattle shipping week, every full meal would be sold below Mercer Station's cheapest plate. It was a price no independent station could match for long. Jonah brought the notice back folded in his coat. Mara read it once. They'll lose money. For a week. To make us lose more. Yes. Cattle shipping week was their best chance to build winter reserves. Without it, the improved figures would not matter much. The station still needed roof repairs before snow. The stable roof leaked. 2 wagon yard posts needed replacing. And there was debt. Always debt. Jonah leaned against the counter. We could cut prices. No. If we lose the crews, if we match them, we lose money on every plate. We might keep the traffic. For what? He looked at her. Mara placed 3 white pegs in a row. Busy does not mean profitable. Jonah rubbed his thumb along the counter edge. Silas knows that. Yes. He also knows Continental can afford a bad week. Mara looked toward the window. A farm wagon was unloading potatoes. Another waited behind it. What do the crews complain about at Continental? Jonah thought. Waiting. What else? Crowding. What else? They change horses slower during shipping week. Mara nodded. Then we don't compete on price. On what? Time. The next 6 days were spent preparing. Mara changed the board again. Fewer meal combinations. Pre-portioned bread. Beans kept ready. Potatoes cooked in larger batches. Extra benches were moved outside beneath the overhang. Jonah repaired the hitching rail and opened a second place for teams to turn around behind the shed. The peg system gained another column. Takeaway. On the final evening before shipping week, Mara stood alone in the meal room, counting wooden pegs. Jonah came in carrying a folded envelope. She looked at it. What is that? Silas sent another offer. For the station? Jonah nodded. Higher? Much. Mara set down the pegs. He handed her the paper. Continental would buy Mercer Station immediately. The amount was enough to clear every debt Jonah carried. Mara read to the bottom. There was one additional condition. Current mealroom management would not be retained. She folded the paper carefully. Jonah watched her. He wants me gone. Yes. And if you sell? I don't know what I'd do. That wasn't my question. Jonah's eyes stayed on hers. No. Outside, wagon bells sounded faintly along the northern road. The first cattle crews were already arriving early. Mara put the offer on the counter. How many teams did Continental order away from us? 3 major crews. How many men? Close to 40. Mara looked at the pegboard. Tomorrow's columns were empty. The room was ready. The food was ready. The road was not theirs to command. Jonah walked to the front door and checked the latch. Once. Then again. Mara noticed. When do the first wagons reach the crossing? Sunrise. She turned the board around so the empty rows faced the room. Then, sunrise tells us whether we have a winter. At sunrise, Mercer Station was ready for a crowd that did not come. Mara stood behind the counter, with the first pan of potatoes warming near the stove. Jonah watched the road through the front window. One wagon passed, then another. Neither turned in. The pegboard remained empty. By 8 o'clock, Mara had served 6 men. Continental's yard down the road was already crowded. Jonah came back from checking the hitching rail. We could lower the price on beans. No. By a cent. No. Mara. She placed clean tin cups beneath the shelf. If we sell food for less than it costs, Silas does not have to beat us. We do it for him. Jonah looked toward the road again. You are very calm for someone who spent nearly all our mealroom cash. I am not calm. She straightened 3 white pegs in a row. Jonah saw them. This time he did not mention it. At 9, a freight wagon finally turned into Mercer's yard. 4 men came inside. Then another wagon arrived behind it. The second driver walked in shaking his head. Continental's got 20 teams stacked nose to tail. Mara pointed toward the menu. Food in 6 minutes if you order now. Potatoes and eggs. Coffee? Yes. A blue peg clicked into place. Then another. Within half an hour, the first table filled. By 10, the benches outside were occupied. Continental's low prices had done exactly what Mara hoped they might. They had drawn more men than the larger depot could serve quickly. Freight crews worked by the mile and the hour. Cheap food stopped being cheap when a wagon sat waiting. Men began turning toward Mercer Station. Mara never asked where they had been first. She took their orders. Jonah moved plates. The cook fire stayed hot. Red pegs filled the first column. Blue pegs crowded the second. White pegs began appearing under takeaway. Near noon, Jonah found Mara cutting bread. Look! She glanced toward the board. Only 4 holes remained empty. She went back to cutting. We need more potatoes. That is all you have to say? We need more potatoes. Jonah laughed once and went outside. The next 2 days were harder. Continental kept its prices low. Mercer kept its prices steady. Some crews chose Continental. Others chose Mercer because they could get in, eat, and get moving. Mara's system held. Nobody waited for a forgotten order. Nobody ate on a tab. The farm wagons kept arriving because Mara paid them the same day. By the 4th afternoon, Jonah sat down with the ledger during a quiet half hour. He worked through the figures twice. Then a 3rd time. Mara noticed him checking the front latch afterward. Once, not twice. She looked at him. Well? We are ahead of last year's shipping week. How far? Enough that I checked it 3 times. Mara nodded. That sounds more reliable than twice. The door opened. Silas Vane walked in. His coat was clean, despite the mud outside. His gloves were still on. He stopped when he saw the room. Every table was occupied. 2 men waited at the counter. The pegboard was nearly full. Silas looked at Jonah. You have been busy. Jonah said, We have. Silas waited until the 2 customers took their plates. Then he placed a folded paper on the counter. My final offer. Jonah did not touch it. Silas looked at Mara. You should read the condition again. I remember it. Then you understand this is business. Mara said, I do. Silas turned to Jonah. The figure clears every debt you have. You keep enough to start again somewhere else. Jonah looked down at the paper. For a moment, Mara said nothing. This was his building, his debt, his choice. Then Jonah walked to the shelf. He took down the account book. Silas watched him. Jonah placed it on the counter. Not in front of himself. In front of Mara. Silas's expression changed. Jonah said, You should ask the person running the part of this business you want removed. Silas looked at Mara. You are not an owner. No. Then the decision is not yours. Mara opened the ledger. She turned it around. The week's figures faced Silas. Meals sold. Supply costs. Cash remaining. Margins. Nothing hidden. We do not need your price, she said. Silas studied the page. His eyes moved more slowly the second time. You cannot know what winter will do. No. You cannot know whether these crews stay loyal. No. You cannot know whether your farm suppliers keep coming. No. Silas looked almost irritated by the answers. Mara rested one finger beside the figures. But I know what this station earned this week without selling below cost. A teamster approached the counter. 2 beans, 1 egg plate. Mara moved 3 red pegs. Silas stepped aside. Another man came forward. Then another. For several minutes, Silas stood there while business continued around him. No one made a speech. No one defended Mara. They simply paid her, ordered from her, waited for her numbers, trusted that the right plate would arrive. Silas finally picked up his contract. Continental will not keep losing money to make a point forever, Jonah said. That sounds sensible. Silas put the paper inside his coat. He looked once more at the crowded room. Then he left. Continental raised its prices 2 days later. By the end of shipping week, Mercer Station had enough money for the roof repair, winter stores, and the next debt payment. Silas never made another offer. The nearby farms continued supplying Mara because she paid on time. The freight crews kept stopping because the station worked. A month later, Jonah put a new sheet of figures on the counter after closing. Mara read them. Then she saw the line at the bottom, half partnership. She looked up. You mean the business? Yes. Only the business? Jonah took off his hat. The business first. Mara waited. Because you earned that part, he said. Anything beyond it is not something I get to include in an account book. Her eyes stayed on his. And if I want something beyond it? Jonah set his hat on the counter. Then I would like that too. Mara closed the ledger. That is a better answer. After the last dishes were stacked, they stood together before the pegboard. Jonah erased the chalk heading. Mercer's Station disappeared beneath his hand. He wrote again. Mercer and Bell. Mara read the new name once. Then she picked up a red wooden peg and placed it beneath tomorrow morning's first column. If you enjoy Western stories where trust is earned through action, subscribe and leave a like.